You're listening to Contesting Wrestling, the podcast where I am somebody who does not care for wrestling, and I interrogate 2 to 3 of my closest friends who are people who are the opposite of people who don't care for wrestling in that they do. That's the best way to phrase that.
Most concise.
There we
and
go.
Direct.
And
Least
what's your name,
circuitous.
My name is Evan Burke. I am a writer and a somebody who likes to shout into the bag that is Twitter, and you can follow that bag at Evan Burke, etc. That's Evan Burke, ETC.
My name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been in professional wrestling about 11 years now. I do commentary, ring announcing, I do wrestling. I do this podcast, and it's a lot of fun, and I'm happy to talk wrestling with Evan and with
Dr. Ben Abelson, professor of philosophy at Mercy College, swimmer in the bag full of wrestling.
Our sometimes fourth ref Katie Vela is not here this weekend for 2 reasons. She's at PAX East, having a good time at PAX East.
Oh, I was going to say that she's occupied rescuing several animals and pieces of antique furniture from a burning house.
You see, that'd be excellent, except she's been tweeting a bunch from PAX East, so I can't make anything up. But there's another reason, is that I said, we're going to watch a bunch of hour-long Kenny Omega matches, and her eyes glazed over, and she fell to the ground, and I think that means she shouldn't be on this episode.
These are all great cover stories for the fact that
Not exactly her style.
Katie killed a man. And you know what? It was fun to watch.
I'm not going to tell her you said that, and somebody's going to bring it up to her, and that's going to be great.
As Doc alluded to already, we are discussing the so-called best bout machine, Kenny Omega, on this episode. By Evan's request.
Yes, I requested this. We have encountered Kenny Omega a couple times in the course of this podcast, and I'm just really intrigued by the guy. And I will say, in part due to some of the matches we're going to discuss today, and in part due to some of the matches we are going to discuss on the premium compliments to this episode that's going to show up on our Patreon, patreon.com/contestingwrestling. You get 1 extra episode per week for $5 a month. Kenny Omega might be my favorite wrestler so far.
All right.
In terms of, like, you know, I know wrestling fans love rankings of things, and it's hard for me to rank. Like, I would say, like, I have an upper echelon of, like, Shawn Michaels, Rey Mysterio, Kenny Omega is probably in my, like,
Guerrero up there.
I need to watch more Eddie. I'm sure Eddie's up there.
We will definitely get to more Eddie one day.
Yeah, I just haven't seen that much Eddie. But in terms of, like, I guess just in terms of what I want to see Omega, even in just the handful of matches that we've watched, there is such a dazzling variety of styles that he does. The matches all have very different flavors to them, and there is just a real art to his athleticism in terms of there is an abandon that he has that is hard to see in other wrestlers, where he just, like, there's something about, like, his, like, physical commitment, like when he does a flip, when he flips off the top rope or something, it feels like he is letting himself go in a way that I don't see with other wrestlers.
Yeah, especially that what do you call it? Tope con hilo.
Yeah.
Over the top rope, when he calls it the rise of the Terminator, I think. And yeah, he completely no regard whatsoever, or no fear whatsoever for what will happen to his body, and a lot of trust in his opponent to catch him as well.
Yeah, I would say lots of regard, as we can tell from at least one of these matches that we talk about today, where lots of, like, care for his opponent, which is also very important because his finisher especially. His finishing move, the One-Winged Angel, there is so much drama to it. I feel more drama in its build-up and whether or not he executes it or if it gets denied, there it feels more dramatic than a lot of other wrestlers' finishers.
He's done a lot of work in that direction, and it pays off. Even in just watching a few matches of his, like you just have, you get it. He doesn't hit it unless either he's going to win with it or something external is going to stop it. I don't think I've seen anyone kick out of it. Can you remember a time?
Ibushi is the only person who's kicked out of it, as far as I know, in their 2012
match.
2012
match, right? So
Laura,
can even
Laura
say
Morrow, who is she wrote an article about the Ibushi Omega feud. She mentioned it there.
I missed that, but it's true.
I haven't seen that match myself.
But it's true. It's one of the most effective finishing moves in wrestling, and since people know it has such a real finish, there is a real sense of drama with can he hit it. Shawn Michaels used to have that with his super kick. Now, of course, the super kick has become a move that means something completely different in wrestling today. But at the time, when we watched the Iron Man match with Bret Hart, he threw the super kick the first time, and Bret got out of the way, and he kicked the timekeeper, and they stretchered the timekeeper out. And then at the very end of the match, he hits kind of a not-so-good super kick and doesn't pin Bret, and then hits one good one, and that's the finish of the match. He doesn't hit it 5 or 6 times during the match.
Yeah.
It's finally he gets it.
I do think part of that drama also comes from the fact that it looks like it's a very technical move in the sense that it looks like if he fucks it up at all, the other person will die.
So just to describe the move
yes, please.
To the listeners. So he has the opponent on his shoulders, sitting on his shoulders in what's called an electric chair position. And then he reaches up and grabs the opponent behind their head and then swings them down toward the canvas so that they land on the back of their neck between his legs as he sits down. So they go from having their head all the way up in the air, way above his head because they're sitting on his shoulders, to having their head compressed beneath him in a very violent sort of way. And so they have to tuck their head completely so they land on their shoulders. Otherwise, they'll land on their head and break their neck.
Yeah, it's a very precision move. It has to be done just right by both parties. And, when it hits, you believe it.
And I think, something I've noticed, we just wrapped our series on Chris Jericho, and I'm learning more about wrestling. I'm learning more about the psychology of matches, about how moves work, and where they and what roles certain moves play, and finishers especially. And Jericho's move, the Walls of Jericho, which is a submission hold, was the first one that really got me thinking about the drama of a finisher and the power of a finisher and how important it is to have something that is really that imparts a sense of drama somehow, whether it be through something that looks devastating, through something I love the submission hold as a finisher because it's just it gives it that much more chance to be dramatic, and it's also part of why not to just always shit on this guy, but Roman Reigns' jump punch is so just
he
dry
cocks his arm. I was actually going to talk about that with respect to Omega's opponent in one of these matches, the Wrestle Kingdom 12 IWGP title match against Kazuchika Okada, because I think Okada's finisher, the Rainmaker, also has some really great drama to it. There are a number of parts to the move. You roll the person up in this ripcord kind of thing, and then swing them outwards and hit them with a big clothesline or a lariat,
ballroom dancing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very much ballroom dancing.
Totally.
And there's several different things that can happen between all those steps,
and the people can see how well it's being done as it's being done at every point where there needs to be some torque. You can see if Okada doesn't really get the rip on it,
And when he has the person rolled up, they can elbow him, or they can, they can move their body in a way that they can get out of the hold. Once he swings them outward in the ripcord, they can duck under the lariat, or they can kick him in the face, or they can attack him in some other way. If he even does get the swing of the clothesline, they might grab onto the arm and flip over him. There's numerous possibilities of what can happen.
Well, and it also it's interesting to think of because normally a clothesline is something it's sort of an interrupt, right? It's usually something that you do to somebody as they're running towards you. It's something that, very rarely would you, I imagine I could be pulling this out of my ass, but very rarely is there a setup to a clothesline.
Yeah.
And so I guess that really indicates a sense of control in the match where it's like, I am setting you up to do something to you that would normally be like an almost an accidental move or almost an incidental move.
And interestingly, the genesis of the Rainmaker clothesline, the original clothesline that was kind of like that was Jake the Snake Roberts' short clothesline.
Oh, yeah. That was always very effective, but it was never his finish.
Yeah, he would grab the person's arm, wind them up, and hit them with the clothesline. And if there was anyone who ever radiated control in a match, it was Jake the Snake Roberts. And they used to he was kind of the first wrestler that I remember hearing the announcers refer to as a master psychologist. And draw attention to his ring psychology. And that move, I think, exemplified that a
lot. So let's, before we get deeper into the Omega Okada match, do you want to talk about the two more comedic matches that happened earlier in his career?
Yeah, so one of the things I love about Kenny Omega, and this is true for also his sometimes partner and opponent, Kota Ibushi, is that he is both a master of the cutting-edge style of athletic, hard-hitting, very serious puroresu, and at the same time, ridiculous, absurdist, avant-garde comedy wrestling. And he did more of that early in his career. And the transition from that early career to the later stuff is really interesting. So he was wrestling. He started off in the Ontario kind of indies because he's from that area of Canada. And then
he's from Winnipeg.
From Winnipeg.
Just like Chris Jericho.
Yeah. And he started wrestling a little bit in the American independents. He was in Ring of Honor. Doc and I first saw him in Ring of Honor.
Yeah, he didn't spend a lot of time in Ring of Honor. He was never really full-time in Ring of Honor. But he was getting a lot of buzz, so they booked him for, several matches with their top guys. He wasn't quite the wrestler he became, but you could tell there was something special about him.
Yeah, also I think Ring of Honor was a little too serious for him
at the time, for sure.
He was doing this very video game-oriented gimmick. He would throw Hadoukens at his opponents and things like that.
He is a known entity in the fighting game circles, not necessarily independent of his wrestling so much, but that he goes to the big fighting game events and he's just known in those circles very well.
He did a lot better in PWG, which has a much more lighthearted approach to wrestling.
But still has drama-filled serious matches. It's just that everybody is doing their art so hard. You can sprinkle in some of that other stuff, and it's, accepted.
I mean, he sort of makes me think of, a Robin Williams sort of thing or something like that, where it's he's clearly a gifted comedic actor, and then also turns out that a truly gifted comedic actor is also a great dramatic actor, because you kind of do the same things and it's just sort of about the context.
Yeah.
Because great comedic performances are always very serious, probably my favorite comedy of all time is Young Frankenstein, which is a movie featuring Gene Wilder giving an incredibly serious performance. There's very little that's that you would it's a great comedic performance, but it's a great comedic performance because he is an incredible dramatic actor,
I recently saw an interview with Ed O'Neill about getting the role of Al Bundy on Married with Children, and he said he had been doing mostly serious plays in New York City, and he was out on one of the basketball courts playing, which is what he liked to do physically at the time. And somebody's like, well, there's an audition here for a TV show, and we'd like you to audition right now. And he's like, right now for a TV show? I'm mostly a stage actor, whatever. So they bring him in, and they give him the script, and it's him, and then his wife is doing something that displeases him, and you say the lines. And he saw, it was an open audition, and everyone was kind of doing the Ralph Cramden. They were always like, you, my wife! And he's like, I'm not going to do that. So we decided just to sound defeated. And, he was just like, oh, okay. because that's going to happen today. And they loved it because it was actually funny, because he brought the real, like, dramatic acting part of it, because the script was funny and the situation was funny. So if you play it straight enough, it's funny. I'll give you one more example, even though I don't really have to, but it just immediately came to mind, was Leslie Nielsen from the Naked Gun series. He was another guy who, like, he only played serious roles. And when he did the Naked Gun movies, he changed nothing about how he played any of the roles. By design. It was the most absurd scripts you could think of, and he just played the straight, hard-nosed detective through all of it.
It makes me think of, you read, I've read interviews with the other cast members from Star Trek The Next Generation, where, like, they were all just, like, working actors in Hollywood, and they're like, oh, we're going to do this, like, dumb sci-fi show that, I mean, yeah, sure, it's, it's Star Trek. There's
revival.
Like, sure, there's some prestige, but, like, nobody's, like, got great expectations for it or anything, and they just got this incredible Shakespearean actor and who showed up and just took it so seriously that everybody was like, fuck, we gotta bring a higher level to this. And like, and that's
our game.
If you watch, like, especially like the early Next Gen episodes, like, they're so silly and they're so ridiculous. And Patrick Stewart is just fucking there delivering those lines, and everybody is like rising to the occasion around him. Well, everybody's trying to rise to the occasion around him.
They all do eventually.
Yeah.
Picard is awesome, by the way.
I'm definitely going to take your CBS All Access info after this episode so I can watch it.
So one of the matches we watched, so he was doing a bunch of the indies, and then Omega started to watch this promotion in Japan, DDT, which stands for Dramatic Dream Team. And he saw this guy, Kota Ibushi, who is this incredible athlete who was also doing a bunch of comedic, absurdist kind of stuff. I think they were already doing the Anywhere matches in DDT at the time. Yeah. So Omega makes this video with another local Ontario wrestler named Mike Angel and someone he got to be a referee. And this is somewhere in July 2008. And it's an Anywhere match. And the idea of the Anywhere match is they would wrestle in parks, in the middle of a crowded street, just anywhere. And so it's in this cabin somewhere in, the Canadian wilderness.
Angel sitting there playing Super Mario World, and you can tell because they play the music of when you're playing Super Mario World, complete with sound effects. I appreciated that.
And he's wearing this robe, and Omega comes in with the referee, and he's like, Mike Angel, I challenge you for the Canadian 24/7 championship. And Mike Angel's kind of like, okay, and he takes off the robe and he's wearing full wrestling gear underneath.
I mean, Doc, you can confirm this, that if you are a professional wrestler, you legally have to always wear your spandex underneath your regular clothes at all times.
All the time. And if you're at a wrestling event, you have to be standing just beyond the curtain. That's how people always respond, with their gear and music queued up whenever their name is mentioned, even if there was no previous reason for them to be there.
It is so crowded backstage behind most wrestling events where all wrestlers are at all times.
Yeah, where you live, right?
Right, where I live, Hornswoggle lives under the ring, and I live right behind the curtain.
So Omega made this video specifically to send to DDT so that they would hire him and so he could work with Ibushi.
And they did.
I mean, it's incredible. It is like, because, like, they wrestle outside of his house, and then they wrestle on a pier, and then
he drowns Mike Angel apparently for a little while.
He got better.
He goes up to the ref and he's like, he's dead. Count. Count. Which, as you pointed out, if he's dead, I mean, do you need to count? Isn't it over?
Well, he counts and he gets to 9 before Angel apparently is not dead.
He emerges from the depths and continues to fight
and puts him in an ankle lock.
Yeah.
Dude, every time, I mean, we were watching this, and it's like a short video. It's like 8 minutes long, and every time one of the guys takes a bump onto just the hard ground, and you can hear. I felt like I could hear his spine crack at one point.
The finish, they climb up on this gigantic mound of dirt that's collapsing underneath them as they fight on top of it. And then finally Omega does an island driver onto the top of the mound, and the dude just ragdoll rolls down it to the bottom, and then Omega pins him mercifully.
The way that the video is cut makes it feel like they were wrestling for hours and hours and hours and just moving from location to location.
It was absolutely ridiculous. We'll get the link somewhere.
Yeah,
for
if
this.
you look for Kenny Omega is the king of the anywhere match on YouTube, you'll find it.
Well, he knew very early on that like thinking outside the box was gonna. I don't know. I was gonna say like he knew thinking outside the box was gonna be the next thing in wrestling, but I don't know if he did. He just decided to think outside the box, and it's been working very well for him.
By the way, when I used to hang out in my parents' country house in the Catskills when I was a kid, I daydreamed of doing just that. Of having a wrestling match in the house and using all the appliances. He burns the guy on the stove at one point. They fight over who can hit the other with the refrigerator door.
Well, and I feel like Omega's just a really good example of what happens in successive generations of any art form, where it's like look at Shawn Michaels, right? Where it's like like Shawn Michaels was, coming up, obviously was very influenced by like traditional like American wrestling and all this stuff, but also he like was really into, presumably he was really into like glam and like a lot of music. So, like a lot of wrestlers of his generation started to bring in like all these music influences and all these things absorbed from the pop culture at the time.
Him and Marty Jannetty were the rockers, definitely.
And so to me, Kenny Omega, seeing him like in the match he did with Jericho that we did for a Jericho episode, he comes out in like the full like JRPG boss
that
stuff.
weighs like 182 pounds apparently.
Yeah.
I think that was just a meme. Well, do you know what the root of that was? There was a boxing match last weekend. Tyson Fury versus the guy who Tyson Fury punched in the face.
Deontay Wilder.
Yeah. Deontay Wilder. And Deontay Wilder was saying, I didn't realize all the stuff that I was wearing to the ring weighed like 50 pounds, so I was tired when I got to the ring, which is one of the lamest excuses I've ever heard. For something like that. So somebody posted a picture of Kenny Omega, and that's it. Like, this weighed 180 pounds.
I get it.
The better picture that I saw going around was a picture of Vader wearing his big old Vader thing. Like, Vader didn't use that as an excuse. He just put it down and started like, Tyson Fury punched you in the face and you lost. It happens. It's okay.
But yeah,
you still got paid a lot.
Obviously Kenny Omega, who is like almost exactly our age, I think, or I think he's between somewhere between
he's
you
around
and me.
our age.
Obviously, he's like super influenced by video games. He did all stuff, and then it's also just if you grow up watching all this wrestling and it all takes place in a ring, it's not a huge jump to be like, well, what if you wrestled somewhere else, right? Yeah.
And it's also like the post backyard wrestling world, and I don't mean that people don't still do that, but once it became normalized on the fringes of wrestling fandom just to set up a ring in your backyard, it's like, well, how about if we don't have a ring? How about if we do it, on a pier in the lake or whatever body of water it was they were wrestling in?
And now recently it's become popular for wrestlers to have matches, often death matches with like a bunch of hardcore shit, but not always, just in a bar.
Yeah, bar wrestling.
Ring. I saw Zack Sabre Jr. and Chuck Taylor have a match just in a bar.
I always wonder how they got Zack Sabre Jr. for that.
And like a month later, they were wrestling in the Tokyo Dome for New Japan.
Well, that's a good way to get around the State Athletic Commission a lot of times because like they have to define, since most of the time the State Athletic Commission regulation of wrestling is nothing but a shakedown. They have to really identify what wrestling is so they can shake you down for it. And one of the big things is you need a ring. And in a lot of places, it's specifically like a ring with 3 ropes. So if you don't have that, the State Athletic Commission isn't going to do it because they're not gonna regulate any other kind of stage fighting.
Which is why extremely serious wrestling is not wrestling or fighting.
No, it's comedy. Come check out extremely serious wrestling. Totally. It's totally wrestling.
It's a great show.
It really is.
Now, when we're talking about, how much how much Kenny Omega really looks out for his opponents because he's doing all these devastating moves, we watched an incredible comedy match.
Yeah, so Omega has been doing these comedy matches in DDT for a while. And then sometime in 2011, they're doing it's actually not a DDT show. It's a Stardom show. And Stardom is the top Joshi promotion, the top women's wrestling promotion in Japan. And apparently they had this, she was 7 when she started training. They had this 7-year-old girl who would show up to the training camp and was kind of promising, she could do some stuff and they wanted to use her, but everyone was afraid to have a match with a now 9-year-old girl. But they were like, hey, Kenny, you're safe, right? Do you want to have a match with a 9-year-old girl? And I think with, the first thing to go through your head is like, shit, if I fuck this up, my career is over.
Oh, you're not just your career, but you'll be in jail.
Right. But Omega, had enough confidence in his abilities that he's like, yeah, sure, I'll wrestle the 9-year-old girl. Her name is Haruka. And they had a hell of a fucking match.
It's amazing.
The rules of the match specifically were they had a 3-minute time limit, and she won if she could last the 3 minutes. And
she lasted the 3 minutes.
She lasted the 3 minutes. It was incredible. It opened a lot of eyes to Omega. It opened a lot of eyes of people who really hate Omega now because he does stuff like this for a variety of reasons.
Jim Cornette said, quote, he should have his throat slit and be boiled in oil. For having that match.
What? Why? What is the why?
Because it's showing people that wrestling is fake. Because Jim Cornette is stuck in the world of the far past. I don't even follow his exploits anymore. And it's
also just once again, it's like it's obviously fucking fake, guys. Like I don't know what to fucking say. It's everybody knows.
Yeah, everybody knows.
It's Cornette's gimmick. It's what gets him attention,
yeah.
And that's how Omega put it. It's like, oh yeah, Cornette, is no longer really relevant in wrestling. Hey, if he tags Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks and whoever and talks shit about them, maybe some more people will listen to his podcast.
And also, it really does demonstrate. For me, it was also a real learning experience in where because when I'm watching matches, it can be hard to know sometimes. Obviously, two guys are working together to execute a lot of these throws and stuff. But it can be hard to tell where the bulk of the work is with certain throws, unless you're actually training in the ring or something like that. And so the way that he makes it look real like she is throwing him across the way, when she spins around and does the stuff, and then it really convincingly looks like she's flinging him across the ring, even though you intellectually know that there's no possible way that's what's happening.
She gains the momentum when they're spinning with her ankles around his head.
I mean, it helps that she has incredible body control and timing, and her kicks look really good.
Yeah.
But nothing in it, given the conventions of wrestling, none of it looks particularly unrealistic. He's not selling punches in the face like she's killing him or something. He doesn't do any moves to her that she just gets up from.
Yeah.
At the very end, he's about to give her Kreutz Wrath, the big German suplex, and that would kill her, and he doesn't. He doesn't. The time limit.
The biggest
ends.
move he hits on her is the first one where he gives her that backbreaker, and you can see him stopping her body before anything bad can happen to it, and then they all sell it like it hurts, which is what you're supposed to do,
too,
and that's wrestling, and everybody there liked it.
I mean, it seems like it's basically a more extreme version of how they, of how matches with Rey Mysterio and a guy twice his size.
Right,
exactly.
He did give her the one enziguri.
Yeah, I don't think he made even contact. It's just perfect.
Yeah, it looked fine,
Yeah.
and she was okay.
I love
she's
his
going to be.
mannerisms. I love his mannerisms. He plays cartoon villain in this match, and I don't mean cartoon villain the way we describe a cartoon villain in an adult movie. No, he plays children's cartoon. I'll get you, villain, and it's just great. Including after the match when he loses and he puts his head down and shuffles off.
He tries to shake her hand and she won't go for it.
Yeah, right.
And he's just totally defeated.
She's whenever she comes of age I feel like if she stays wrestling, she's going to eventually be the greatest wrestler who's ever lived.
She's 18 now. She showed up at a Stardom show about a year and a half ago, and everyone was like, "Oh shit, we gotta have the rematch." I don't know. I don't think she's actually wrestling now, though. Unfortunately.
I mean, I guess
people asking, no, she's not Riho. That's
Riho.
somebody else.
I mean, I guess a lot of people get really into stuff when they're ages 7 to 9, and then
it's like
it
if
changes.
You take a karate class, and maybe you're gonna go on and join a real dojo and get your black belt, or maybe you're gonna take a karate class. Yeah.
So
Oh no, I was just saying. I mean, Omega. He's a guy who I could, if he ever gets a serious injury or anything like that, he's somebody who I do think his shtick would work outside of wrestling. I do feel like he could So I doubt he has any desire to do that.
He could
just,
easily be as mainstream of a star in the video game world as there is a mainstream star in the video game entertainment world, and yeah, absolutely, definitely.
So anyway, he eventually made his way to New Japan Pro Wrestling, also following Ibushi, who was starting to make a name for himself there. And he worked his way up the card. He turned heel, joining the Bullet Club, and became the cleaner, Kenny Omega.
That's one of those clunky kind of monikers that it doesn't sound quite as good in America when it gets explained to you. But here's the thing: the cleaner is it's a mafia term for a hitman. And that's cool, but I think it would be cool if your first language is Japanese and you hear it's the cleaner, what does that mean? And then you look it up and then you feel smart because you had to figure it out. But when you actually say it in English, it's it's not exactly the coolest name in the world. The same thing happens with the Rainmaker, Kazuchika Okada. And Evan, have I explained to you what the Rainmaker means?
No.
So you think some kind of weather god or
No, well, it was Pac-Man Jones with making it rain, right?
Well, not necessarily Pac-Man Jones. That was just him doing it, but it was.
You go to the strip club and you drop money all over the strippers.
Right. It's an elite athlete thing. It's I'm making it rain. Pac-Man Jones, you just know him because he was in TNA.
Okay, that's when I first heard of the term.
Yeah, you should listen to more rap.
No, but I heard.
Oh yes, yeah, he is not the guy who originated the term making it rain.
But I heard the term not because he was in TNA, but because he got in trouble for being abusive to the strippers.
Right. That was a whole other. There was violence in the club and everything, but it's a term for elite people in the club throwing money in the air and having it come down. And you see Okada come out and he does his pose and dollar bills or bills with his face on it come down. He's making it rain. He's the Rainmaker. The thing is, in America, when you hear the word Rainmaker, that's not what that means.
And I think the connotation there is he's bringing all the money to the company.
Yeah, well, he is.
He's
Okada's actually the best.
Yeah.
Oh no, I was just gonna say there was a great play on Kenny Omega being the cleaner in the last match we'll talk about tonight,
we'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
So he's this really skeevy heel character in the Bullet Club, and we didn't watch any matches from that period, but there was some great shit the announcers would talk about how he shaved his forearms a day or two before the show, so he'd have really abrasive stubble that he could rub against his opponent's head.
That's brilliant.
That's just a good tip for everyday life.
Yeah.
Just I mean, you might be itchy, but then you can you can make people know the business.
So he was a junior heavyweight mostly. He worked his way up the card, and then the night after Wrestle Kingdom the previous year, we watched the match between AJ Styles and Nakamura from that Wrestle Kingdom. The night after, AJ was going to leave for the WWE, so they did an angle where AJ was the head of the Bullet Club at the time. Omega and the Young Bucks turned on AJ, took him out completely, and they assumed control of the Bullet Club, marking themselves out as not only the Bullet Club, but the Elite. And once they branded themselves as the Elite, that eventually led to All Elite Wrestling, AEW. So this is the genesis of that.
Yeah, the years-long story about the rift within the Bullet Club and the Elite kind of separating themselves from the more New Japan originals to the bunch of infighting all the way through to the Elite finally all leaving New Japan and leaving the Bullet Club to the rest of them is an interesting long-term story. New Japan does very good long-term booking.
I did cheat a little bit and look at the Kenny Omega Wikipedia, and he's a vice president in AEW or something like that? Or
all the Elite guys and a couple of other people were given titles of executive vice president. They put a bunch of wrestlers on the board for a couple of reasons. First, to signal to the fans that it's not even though the company is definitely owned by a billionaire, it's not just their vision and everyone else is lucky to come along. The wrestlers are in charge, the ones that know what they're doing. The other thing is AEW is trying to get as many of its signees corporate titles and jobs as possible, because insurance companies will give insurance to people with corporate jobs, but they won't cover professional wrestlers. People will be like, oh, well, how come Vince doesn't cover his wrestlers? And it's well, it's actually a lot more complicated than that, because if your job is to get injured for a living, even big insurance companies either straight up won't sell you a plan because they don't have to because they're private companies, or they'll make the premiums on them so ridiculously high because you're going to need extensive work done that it's more Vince McMahon's while for him just to pay for any surgeries out of pocket that have to happen.
Another problem that would be fixed by Medicare for all.
Yes. Yeah. It's
but someone's going to be like, I don't want to pay for wrestlers' health care who choose to abuse their bodies.
It is
too
really
bad.
Yeah, it is really nice to see. As a quick side note,
I want to pay for it.
We like some health care.
We record these about a month in advance, so it's possible by the time this comes out, the world will already have been racked by the coronavirus, and it'll be a fucking like The Stand situation. But in case that hasn't happened, it is really interesting to see the rifts in the American healthcare system laid so bare by the coronavirus fears, especially with the whole idea of like people like, oh no, don't worry. If we come out with the vaccine, it'll be affordable. And it's like, hey, guess what? Affordable still fucking means a whole lot of people aren't going to get it, which means that it's not going to fucking work because the vaccine only fucking works if everybody fucking gets it.
Right. You'll still have a bunch of people with the virus spreading the virus.
Yeah. Anyway.
That is, so Omega works his way up to the top of New Japan and finally gets an IWGP World title shot against the top guy in the company, Kazuchika Okada, who had just really cemented himself as the top guy in the company the year previous at Wrestle Kingdom 11 when he finally defeated the ace of New Japan, Hiroshi Tanahashi, at Wrestle Kingdom. Like, he had beaten him before, but he had never beaten him at Wrestle Kingdom, and that was a big deal.
2 years previously, they had a match, and it was like, is this Okada's time? No. The end of the match was Tanahashi beating Okada, and like usually at the end of these big shows, whoever wins the main event will get the microphone in the ring a little bit. And Tanahashi, the ace for the previous decade, had the mic, and you could see Okada walking off crying, like actually crying because he lost, which isn't a thing like you really see in American wrestling, not as such anyway. And Tanahashi is saying like, you're really good, but it's not your time yet, buddy. And if you did something like that in American wrestling, it would be Okada's time like the next month. Nah, 2 years later. And he had won and lost the title in that time, but he didn't. He needed to beat Tanahashi at Wrestle Kingdom. They built it as important, and it was. Again, long-term booking is New Japan's biggest strong point.
I have to correct myself. The Okada finally beat Tanahashi at Wrestle Kingdom 10. This match is from Wrestle Kingdom 11. Okada versus Omega.
Yeah, okay, there you
go. Just one bit of clarification. I guess maybe it's because I did not fully understand Okada's character at the time. You guys have explained a little more. During the opening, they pitch it as the man entrusted with wrestling's future versus the man who will change it. What does that mean?
So Okada has been handed the baton as the guy to lead New Japan. The guy, built on the tradition of Japanese wrestling. He's the sort of the culmination of all the Japanese wrestling that has come before him and will therefore lead the company into the future. Omega represents, I'm not continuing the tradition of Japanese wrestling. I'm going to change the world by making Japanese wrestling popular in the United States. Changing the whole makeup of the company in that way, bringing more of maybe an American, North American style into Puroresu.
Now, there had been plenty of Westerners that had become very successful in New Japan before, but Omega was unique among them. He embraced the Japanese style, not in trying to emulate it, but in just trying to be a piece of it himself. Instead of like coming to Japan and being like the American or the Canadian as a guest, he moved to Japan and he lived there for years. He became fluent in Japanese. He like authentically learned how to reflect upon the culture there and become a part of it. And it was a very different thing for them, who like always saw, no matter how popular a foreigner gets, they're still very much the other. And Omega wasn't really the other at that point.
Which is, fascinating because, everybody I have ever known who has spent a lot of time in Japan, something says like, look, man, you can learn Japanese, you can make a lot of friends, you can do all this stuff. You're still never really fully accepted.
Right.
And then, as opposed to America, where we love everybody. But like
this match was in January of 2017.
Yeah.
This was Okada's 4th reign with the title. He had held the title since June 19th of 2016, so about 6 months at this point. He beats Omega in this match, and then holds the title for another 18 months. He holds the title for another 18 months until he finally loses it to Omega on June 9th, 2018. So he had, a 2-year reign with this title, and it's, that really established him as the guy in New Japan.
I was going to say, you can sort of tell a little bit, or at least, I don't know, the crowd seems to really enjoy the degree to which Kenny Omega assimilates in the opening bit that he does with the Terminator bit, where it's like they have this little video package where Kenny Omega like shows up in a back alley in Japan.
Give me your clothes.
Yeah, like does the whole like opening bit from Terminator 2, and they laugh at him and they insult him in Japanese, and then you see a little sort of like robot vision from Kenny's POV where it switches from English to Japanese, and then he just says, "Your clothes, give them to me," in flawless Japanese, and the crowd fucking loves it.
Yeah. They really did love how much effort he put into assimilating to the culture there, and like that was a cool video package. His half Terminator mask was really cool. His entrance was real cool. He really went all in for it there. Around then is when people started calling him the Terminator. Kenny Omega is one of his many monikers.
He always likes having a gun when he walks to the ring. That's
yeah. I think he likes to pose with it the way people pose with gigantic Final Fantasy swords. And
he's got his thing. He'll close out the show with goodbye and good night, bang.
Yeah, with his pose.
Yeah. The crowd there are a lot of times where the crowd is very impressed with him. There's a point at around 14 minutes and 57 seconds where Okada is sort of, he's in like a back suplex sort of position, pinning Omega down, and Omega, instead of kicking out of being pinned, rises up in a way that's like very physically impressive, and it's just, you hear the crowd go like, oh wow. That's like, I've never heard that sound come out of an American audience.
So that's actually kind of a common thing to happen in like technical wrestling. They get into that position and the one person bridges up. The crowd reacted that way mostly because of the timing of it. It was a 2 count, and right before the 3 count, Omega bridged up like that. Often you'll see people not quite get it right, and either the ref has to kind of hesitate before the last count, or they'll roll the shoulder up, get back into position, and then bridge up.
Like, wait, I got it this time. I got it. Wait, up, and then you go, and then no. Not in the main event at the Tokyo Dome. Not with these two guys. They're going to do it smooth, and it's going to look fantastic.
Which is why Dave Meltzer gave it 6 out of 5 stars.
Right. This is the match that Meltzer had been giving 5 stars to a few matches to. Then he saw this and he was like, well, this is clearly better than those matches. We'll give it 6 stars, which, is a very controversial thing amongst the kind of people who, would feel like a critic giving somebody a good review is controversial, which happens all the time in not only wrestling, but every kind of medium. You just got to learn to ignore stuff like that.
It is funny how, because Kenny, he can play, it seems like he can play a variety of characters, and he can be truly evil and all this stuff. He has a nice face. He looks like a nice man. I look at him and I was like, I bet Kenny Omega calls his grandma really often. He has a face that makes me feel bad about I don't call my grandma enough.
Well, he is Canadian.
Yeah,
so that's nice.
Yeah, he's got the curly blonde.
Polite.
It's like he's got the curly blonde hair that it's very boy. He's got a very boyish kind of persona. Or not persona like his face, but then that's the thing. His persona can change wildly from match to match, and because then it also really works in matches where he's being a villain, or a somebody who wants to inflict pain, stuff like that. I mean, he looks evil. He looks truly evil, and it really works with the friendly face.
So this match is, it's remembered as one of the all-time classics. It's very long. It's like
dude.
45, 50 minutes long, just the match.
They went even longer. They had an hour draw a little bit later.
They did. That was a very good match also.
But the crazy thing is towards the end, like you were talking about Omega's physical style and his abandon. He has this explosive energy that I've never seen with anybody else before. And at the end of the match, when he's like doing his comeback and stuff, it's even more explosive than it was 45 minutes earlier.
He does not appear to get tired.
Yeah.
On the topic of getting tired, I will say, man, this is just a meta statement in regards to like the general thrust of this podcast and the whole idea of trying to get people like me who were not into wrestling. No wrestling match should exceed. I'm gonna say if it is a masterpiece of a match, 35 minutes is okay.
Yeah.
In general, like fucking cap that shit 20 to 30, man. Because no matter how good, like I said, like Kenny Omega is probably my favorite wrestler at this point. A match that we are going to cover on the premium episode, the match between Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi, might be my favorite match. It might have beat out Eddie Ray in terms of my favorite match. But like this is incredible. Too fucking long, man. It's too fucking long. At 40 minutes, I get on my phone. I start spacing out.
And
like I can't fucking do it.
This was the main event of a 6 or 7 hour pay-per-view. And this was the longest of all the matches. So you've already seen a bunch of 20, 30-minute matches.
It's like watching like the special edition Lord of the Rings, just one after another. I like, the thing about matches that are this long, since we're like covering them like as individuals, it seems like, oh, these matches are so long. The context of it being at the end of one of these shows makes it acceptable to fans that are really into it. But it's like, I like to liken it to like listening to The Wall beginning to end. It's like really long, but what are you going to do? You're going to cut it down to one disc? It's like, no, it's The Wall. But you can't put out another album like The Wall. And, maybe Animals is a better album than The Wall, but it's not the
that's just science. It is a better album.
We can go on about that
and
for
you
a while.
can do amazing things like, so I think Okada has the best standing drop kick of all time.
Yeah.
And he, in this match, like 30 minutes in,
he waits
for the exact right moment, and he hits it, and it's magnificent, and the crowd goes nuts. Did you notice that, Evan, when he hits this beautiful drop kick?
It
didn't specifically stick in my mind.
Okay. It's one of those things. If you watch a lot of Okada matches, he's been putting it later and later and later into these really long matches that he does.
And you make a good point in that there wasn't any part of this match where I was like, oh, this part is stupid, or oh, like I'm bored now as a result of what is happening in the match. They're like, I don't know what I would have shaved down.
There's no 10-minute chin lock in the middle so they can catch their breath.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, like the dropkick situation, there's a lot of things you're not getting. There's references to earlier matches, this is a reversal of a move. I mean, they hadn't had earlier matches before, but it's like, oh, he usually gets people with this move, but Omega figured out a reversal to it, stuff like that.
I also got to say, I don't know if this is specific to Omega or just also part of the NJPW style in general. I find the reversals so much more visually interesting.
Yeah.
They're just like they seem to be more. There's more energy to the reversal. There's a lot more like big reverse where like it's like people like flip over each other, lots of like, oh, I'm on your shoulders, oh, now I'm crawling down, oh, now you're on my shoulders, like lots of like just stuff like that. That's so cool.
Omega's very good at that, but that is very much NJPW like main event style.
Yeah.
And going back to the previous point, like one of the things that's really rewarding for New Japan fans is the matches really do build off of previous matches in that way. So they have to introduce new spectacular reversals because the crowd is waiting for them.
The way that this ends, where Omega is about to deliver a one-winged angel and Okada masterfully escapes it and turns it into a tombstone.
A jumping tombstone.
A jumping, spinning tombstone. Because he hit the regular kind earlier and it didn't work.
And then he hits him with a really big rainmaker, like the third one of the match, and finally beats him.
And then there was a shot of the Japanese commentators on the side just like, my God, what has taken place here tonight? How could such a thing have happened? Oh, it was fucking beautiful.
There's something about there's something about Okada that's like he would be conceited if he weren't actually so good.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole point of his character. Because he doesn't seem like full of himself. He's just like, oh no, I am the best. Look at me 40 minutes into a match and tell me that I'm not the most powerful being in the world.
Yeah, like he's got it's an energy that I guess is sort of like a wrestling version of like Beyonce or somebody like that, where it's like it's not Beyonce isn't conceited. She's just like, yes, I'm one of the greatest performers to ever live. What is your point? Look at all of the data that backs that up. Also, look at all of this shit that I've done that's incredible. Like, yeah, like even if you aren't somebody who like listens to her music regularly, like what kind of fucking space mutant is going to be like, nah, I don't think Beyonce is that great of an entertainer.
Yeah, right,
like
exactly. Yeah. He's one of the few guys like outside the WWE that when asked, Triple H is just openly like, oh yeah, no, we're going to try and get Okada. We're just going to give him as much money as possible. But he's the top guy in New Japan, so New Japan is also just going to give him as much money as possible. And he really wants the New Japan style to be the dominant one. So we'll see what happens.
I will say, as somebody who is new to wrestling, who basically like started watching a lot of WWE at roughly the same time I've watched a bunch of New Japan. New Japan's clearly better. Yeah. It's clearly, and it's not just clearly better, but all of the things that I like, even all the things that I like about the best WWE products that I've seen, like NXT or whatever, New Japan's just better. It's just better at it.
Their big shows, just match for match, are better than the stuff that the WWE puts out, and they even like a lot of the stuff, like I said, you're not necessarily getting because they do long-term booking so well. Is they just do that better than WWE. You watch the WWE you watch one of their shows and then 2 months later see the same shows, and it's like so much stuff doesn't change, yet they still manage to contradict themselves a bunch. New Japan doesn't really contradict itself much, and they really make you want to see things over the course of years.
And WWE used to have sort of larger-than-life characters and really engaging storylines and things like that differentiated them from Puroresu. So there were things that WWE had that New Japan didn't, but WWE doesn't really have those things anymore.
No, and New Japan is doing it better. But the guy who books New Japan, Gedo, who is Okada's manager in this match, you'll see. The guy with the bandana who's just standing on the outside.
Who delivers an amazing monologue at the end that I did not understand a word of, and it was incredibly moving and powerful.
He was a good wrestler, but he had a much better mind than body for wrestling, and he's the booker for New Japan. He's a big fan of old school American wrestling, as specifically like Southern wrestling and Southern tag wrestling with really intricate stuff. We haven't really gotten into that. One day we'll watch some Rock and Roll Express matches, not current ones, although it is fun to see them still wrestle in their 60s. But my point is,
Canadian destroyers and stuff.
Oh my God, Ricky Morton is still the firebrand he was 30 years ago, and Robert Gibson is there too. Just like he was 30 years ago. His eyes looking in increasingly different directions as the years go by. But he saw that in order for Japanese wrestling to become very popular, which it wasn't when he took the mantle of Booker of New Japan. New Japan had several lean years. He needed to introduce more American-style booking. Not current American-style booking, but American-style booking when it worked, with larger-than-life characters and long-term major storytelling. And that doesn't mean you have to have guys that can't wrestle. You still wanted the Puroresu excellent matches, but he established a bunch of characters, and now they're all actually over. And every year the Tokyo Dome show does better. This year they did 2 days in the Tokyo Dome.
And they were able to do it even with all of the elite leaving the year before.
As opposed to like Ring of Honor, that when they left Ring of Honor, they just kind of collapsed, and they're just now starting to try and rev it up again.
Speaking of the elite, the Young Bucks are really obnoxious in Kenny Omega's corner in this match.
Yeah. Well, you could have stopped after the word obnoxious.
So moving on to once again, man.
So speaking of the Elite leaving
Yes.
New Japan and then forming this new company, All Elite Wrestling, AEW, that's on TNT Wednesday nights. They got this show Dynamite. They're doing pretty well for themselves. I haven't watched in a few weeks, but I've read the reports and it sounds like they're doing a lot better creatively. Anyway,
they're getting on live viewing 800,000 to 900,000 viewers every week, sometimes a little more. It's been solid. It's been steady. TNT is happy. They just signed them for like 3 more years.
Omega was the one big wrestling star who had not been in WWE who AEW secured. And so, he's probably the biggest wrestling star in the world who hasn't worked for WWE.
Right. The biggest star they got, of course, was Chris Jericho.
Right. And so they'd done a couple of pay-per-views at this point. This was their Full Gear pay-per-view from last year, from 2019. And Kenny Omega and Jon Moxley, who was a guy AEW got from WWE. He was Dean Ambrose in WWE. And he left and took a pay cut to join AEW because he didn't feel creatively fulfilled in WWE.
Well, man, talk about fucking creativity.
Right.
I mean, creativity, yes, but also, like, his wife, who still works for WWE, Renee Young, must be thinking, he left to do that to himself?
She was live tweeting that whole match, and it went from, this is cool, to, oh, no, I don't like this. You have to stop this.
Right.
So they have a lights-out, unsanctioned match, which basically means that they're not counting the wins and losses like they do normally in AEW, and it's no DQ, and it's just what you call on the indies sometimes a death match. And, well, yeah. So what'd you think, Evan?
All right, so I normally don't care for the hardcore style of wrestling, mostly just because I don't really like blood sport. I don't like to see people in like a lot of pain with a lot of blood and like the torturing and stuff like that. This match, what a fucking roller coaster.
Yeah,
because it started off and I was just like, it really walks this line between like so brutal that it's really hard to watch and like disgusting and shocking and horrifying and like cartoonish and like truly hilariously over the top cartoonish. And I will say I watched the whole time. If this had been like, if we were watching an ECW match where this happened, I would have tapped out and I would have come to this episode and been like, I only watched half this match. Fuck you. I don't care. I don't want to. I watched this whole thing and like I was like sitting at home, like viscerally like, oh my God. Oh, and I actually played into some very specific physical phobias that I had. Cause when I was a child, I dropped a light bulb on the bathroom floor, and I had to pull a bunch of glass out of my feet with tweet. It was like, so I have like a real broken glass, like visceral reaction. I don't know. So let's get into the details of this match.
So for me, I had a kind of a similar experience watching it the first time I watched it. I watched it at a bar at a Full Gear viewing party, and you mentioned the like brutality and then the cartoonishness, and that kind of turned me off about the match a little bit. It's like they're doing this very believable, really brutal stuff, like with the barbed wire at the beginning. They have the barbed wire bat, and then Omega pulls out the barbed wire broom because he's the cleaner.
I just love that those things were under the ring, because like normally when they go and they get tables, ladders, chairs, and trash cans from under the ring, those are all things that could theoretically be being stored under the ring for use later. When he pulled out the bat already covered in barbed wire, I'm like, well, who's keeping that under the ring? I mean, what are you using that for?
He put it there earlier.
I guess.
I mean, that's the psychology. You hide the giant board covered in mouse traps.
Oh,
Okay,
so let's...
Well, first of all, the barbed wire bat, that's sort of a trope.
Yeah.
Originally, it was Mick Foley had one, and he called it Barbie. And then that was long before Negan in The Walking Dead had Lucille. But, and then the barbed wire broom, that was novel. But, they're doing this very sort of realistic, violent shit with the barbed wire. You can see the cuts on their back and everything. Yeah. And then they pull out the fucking board full of mousetraps.
Right.
And it's just like, even if they are real mousetraps, I don't really know how much that would hurt landing on a bunch of mousetraps.
That would hurt a lot.
But the way they close, like, they're not going to close...
They're not. They might not snap your skin shut, but it's still like when I'm flicking you. Like, imagine if that was like 50 times harder.
Yeah,
like that would hurt.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's fucking glue a bunch of mouse traps to a thing, and then I'll throw you on it, and you tell me if it hurts or not.
With your shirt off.
Yeah.
There you go.
That was the thing when they pulled that out. That was like I had been like, oh, like I don't know how I feel about this, and they pulled that out, and I was like, all right, I'm back in.
Yeah, that's the same way I felt
great.
about it. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of and this is an example of what current hardcore style is a lot of the time, and they didn't go too far with the blood, which I think was also good.
I was actually shocked at how little
bit.
blood there really was in the match. Like,
I think they just didn't do a blade job. They were just like, well, we're probably going to bleed in this match because of all the pointy stuff, so let's let the pointy stuff do what it actually does instead of I'm going to cut myself where a lot of blood will come out and then we'll see a lot of blood.
Well, then they pull out the bag of glass. And as a wrestling fan, you're expecting thumbtacks.
Yes.
Which is bad enough.
It's not thumbtacks. It's fucking glass. And I mean, I'm sure it was, I don't know, it was probably sugar glass or something.
You can see the dust going.
Yeah,
in
he sticks
it
in
good.
Omega's mouth or in Moxley's mouth, I think.
He puts Moxley in the cloverleaf there and makes Moxley crawl through the pile of glass.
Oh, yeah.
That was great.
That was great.
Such a metaphor. I loved it.
Excalibur on the good call, like in case you didn't get the heavy-handedness. John Moxley is literally crawling through broken glass.
It gets to a point so there's a point where JR on the commentary is just like he just sounds worried. Like he just turns into everybody's dad where he's like, oh, I don't know about this. And like there's this theme throughout the match where like the ref, other wrestlers, everybody just starts being like, okay, guys.
Yeah,
guys,
the Young Bucks come out. They're like, come on. And he's like, no, I'm going to do this. And they're like, okay, we'll bring out the insane barbed wire spiderweb bed contraption.
I was like, is that a trampoline made of barbed wire?
They just somehow kept escalating.
Well, this was what really annoyed me is they go through that thing. And then that was fine. Like that should have been kind of the end of the match.
That should have been the finish.
But then they have to do the fucking weird explodey wall WWE style cheesy thing.
Right, into
to
the
follow
spotlight.
That up. Like
well, then they do the destroying the ring bit where they pull up the mats and expose the boards, which is what's under there, if you're wondering.
Yeah, that's the first time I ever saw that was at an Evolve show.
Yeah.
It was Drew Gulak versus Timothy Thatcher.
Oh,
and I think Gabe Sapolsky was the first guy to be like, oh yeah, let's rip up the mats and have the board. It's like has this like symbolic violence that you're crossing the boundary.
Oh yeah.
Was that before or after the Nexus?
Oh, did the Nexus do that?
And the initial thing, they destroyed the ring a bit.
But did they drop someone on the boards like that?
I'm not sure. That's a good question.
So I think the first time I saw that was, and then after I think Sapolsky started working with NXT, they did that in one of the Gargano Ciampa matches.
Yes.
Now, does he have a history of doing hardcore stuff at all? Like
sometime.
Kinda, not. I mean, Moxley was the hardcore guy, and they were sort of playing up the story in the match of like, can Omega hang with Moxley in this environment?
And Moxley's attitude, very specifically, was since that was gonna be such a grudge match, like since the inception of AEW, the two of them had kind of been salivating at each other, not out of like hatred, but like we need to have a fight.
And they had to cancel one of their matches too, I think, because Moxley was injured, or
something like that. And so they had made this the lights out match, the unsanctioned match. And Moxley's attitude was, oh, you're trying to make my matches not count. Okay, well, if we're going to do this unsanctioned, I'm going to go all the way with it. And that was his attitude.
Well, and that, we're talking about, Kenny Omega's commitment and his abandon and like lack of a self-preservation instinct. Right. And man, I mean, he really sinks his teeth into this match, like because he also like just the look on his face, just like when he's like gleefully shoving glass into. So he takes a bunch of broken glass and then runs over to the camera and is like, look at all this broken glass I have in my hand, and he runs over and shoves it. And meanwhile, the ref is just like, oh my god. what are you doing? And then like the ref is counting, and then he also has all this broken glass in his hand, and he's like, no.
By the way, speaking of the glass, remember the one episode of AEW Dynamite that you watched, Evan? Remember, it ended with Moxley doing his finishing move, the what's it called? The Death Rider or the Paradigm. They call it the Paradigm shift.
Yes. Yeah.
In AEW, they call it the Death Rider in Japan. He does it to Moxley through a glass table.
Oh, right.
And that's the glass from the glass table, or at least that's what the announcers make it out to be.
That's okay. That's cool.
And then it's the paradigm shift. I don't know why that's so hard to say. It's the paradigm shift onto the boards that finally ends the match.
I love the discussion between JR and the other announcer,
Excalibur.
Excalibur, of they can't figure out if it's an ice pick or a screwdriver, and eventually they just settle on, well, either way, it's an implement of destruction. And they refer to it as an implement of destruction a few more times.
So, yeah, the first time I watched this match, and this time as well, I guess, but the first time I couldn't decide whether I liked it until the end. At the end, I was like, okay, that was a good piece of work.
I was happy.
It's still
how
the
they
bad
won us
match
over.
for today, though.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I would not want to watch it again. You know what? If what we were trying to do was to give me a full vision of Kenny Omega's range, this did an excellent job with that. Because I mean, I have watched him have a fun, lighthearted match with a 9-year-old girl, and I have watched him maniacally shovel glass into another man's face.
Yeah, and everything in between. He
yep.
is a real renaissance man of wrestling. You notice he lost most of these matches too.
Yeah,
and like he doesn't have to win his matches. People have even criticized his AEW run, saying he's lost too much. And I think that we're thinking really long term. He's put over a lot of people. I think he's eventually going to be like one of the top guy in the league. But long term.
Now, has there ever been? This is also I read his Wikipedia.
Yeah.
So has there ever been another wrestler of his stature that's openly gay?
He's not exactly openly gay, I don't think.
I don't know.
Oh, that's very much.
Refuses to comment directly on his sexuality, from what I understand.
Oh, really? Oh,
it's exactly the kind of thing somebody would go on his Wikipedia page and be like, he's so gay. And it's like, well, he doesn't tell you.
There's a lot of suggestion.
I thought there was like a quote. I would have to look it up. I thought there was like a quote.
Like from that Laura Morrow article?
Maybe not. I guess maybe. I guess maybe it was just Wikipedia and I wasn't being critical.
They've certainly made a lot of insinuations over the years, specifically with like him and Ibushi being the Golden Lovers. Like they were originally going to be the Golden Brothers, and then they were like, how about the Golden Lovers? Okay. But also, you have to take into consideration what that would mean in Japan versus what that would mean here, which is a whole other cultural thing that I'm not going to get too into because I'll mess it up.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sure none of us are fully equipped to... I have no idea if Japan is any more or less homophobic than we are as a country, as a culture.
Now, to answer your question though, just about like top stars that have been openly gay, Pat Patterson comes to mind, who is he's been one of the big creative minds in the WWE since like the mid '80s when the WWF happened, and he was a huge star wrestler from the '60s through the '80s, and like. The media on somebody being gay at that point would not be what it would be today and all that, but like he never hid it from anybody.
Yeah.
He would tell all the promoters he'd work for straight up, like, look, since the 60s, he'd be like, look, I'm gay. If you have a problem with that, like, I don't have to work for you, and I promise I won't like embarrass you or anything. So then they did. Dave Meltzer said that he learned in the early 70s when he was a kid what gay was by going to the matches in San Francisco and learning about Pat Patterson, because he was already trying to interview big wrestling fans to try and do the newsletter. And he would interview like the groupies who would tell him, oh, no, we can't get with Patterson. He's gay. And he'd be like, what does that mean? And so they'd explain it to him. And he'd be like, oh, okay.
And I don't want to make it sound like, that it was particularly noteworthy to me that he was gay, but I guess the impression that I got was that he was more open about it than wrestlers had been previously, and I was just impressed that it's like, wow, like in addition to all of these ways as a performer that he's groundbreaking, he's working in a field that is, still very homophobic. There's still a lot of entrenched homophobia,
certainly.
Especially in the community. I think there was a quote where there was a quote where he was talking about like getting messages from WWE fans that were like hostile and homophobic.
That sounds like WWE fans.
And then
I wouldn't be surprised if that had something to do with his decision not to go to WWE and to go for AEW instead. Though he was signed to WWE Developmental long ago for
briefly.
A little while. Yeah.
They had no idea what they had.
Yeah.
Everyone that saw him knew that what they had, but they had no idea what they had.
Because they definitely tried to get him when he was a free agent from New Japan.
It's a whole different story now that he's one of the biggest stars in the world. And if he's gay, I hope if he comes out, that's his business, and he could certainly be a grand representative. But nobody owes you a coming out.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, Kenny Omega, fucking what a goddamn artist, what a goddamn performer.
Big thumbs up.
If we're keeping track of the score of this podcast, like Kenny Omega has been a huge part of advancing me towards being somebody who likes wrestling. I gotta say,
cool.
I feel like I knew that there were a lot of great performers. I didn't really know that there was anybody doing this.
He had a 30-minute Iron Man match with Pac this week on Dynamite. I'm going to hunt that one down for sure.
Yeah, I'll see that eventually, but every time I see like 30-minute Iron Man match, I'm like, I just saw him go 50 minutes with Okada to one fall. Like, you don't really... And I get it in NXT where it's like the format's a lot shorter, but you can just have a match, go that... Well, whatever, never. I'm not going to critique AEW's booking. It's all nitpicking.
It wasn't so much about the length of the match, but that they had both beaten each other a bunch of times.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, well, see who can beat who can get the most falls,
right.
in half an hour. We plugged some things.
Yes.
So I just want to let you know that I, Dr. Ben Abelson, will be presenting at the first annual WrestlePosium, presented by the Pro Wrestling Studies Association. Dr. Carrie Lynn Reinhardt is the president. This will be April 4th, 2020, so WrestleMania weekend. And you can go to prowrestlingstudies.org to find the schedule and to register. It's an online symposium, so you can watch people present the papers from the comfort of your home. It's free and open to anyone to register for the conference.
I will say, personally, Ben and I have known each other for many, many years. I am not an academic. I find his academic work the little that I have read to be very accessible, and certainly. I think you do an excellent job of distilling sort of abstract academic concepts down into a way that is very explainable to people.
I will be talking about the poetry in pile drivers, pro wrestling as art. So exploring in more depth some of the themes that you may have already heard me talk about here on this podcast.
Awesome.
Yeah, cool, man. Cool, man. Yeah, do your thing. Bring it into philosophy. The wrestling is finally kind of getting around to all other parts of culture, and we want to be a little part of that.
Also, I want to say something that we often forget to say on this podcast, but if you listen to us on a platform that allows for liking, subscribing, and or leaving comments or reviews, please do so, because that would really help us, and it would really help us expand our audience. And we would like that to be a thing that happens.
Share and enjoy. Tell your friends.
Change the world.
And follow us on Twitter at ContestingW. This has been Contesting Wrestling. We love you. See you soon.